Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I am here to take a look at the Jace Planeswalker deck from Magic the Gathering's War of the Spark. This is a green and blue deck, and according to the back it says Jace, Arcane Strategist. Jace Beleren likes to stay 2 steps ahead of his enemies. The telepathy helps with that. Dodge your opponent's defenses, disrupt their plans, and relentlessly take over the board. You get a deck box, a 60-card deck, which you can play on tabletop or online. And it says that you get a code to redeem the deck in Magic Arena. You get 2 15-card booster packs, as well as a strategy insert and 2 reference cards. Now this is kind of an interesting choice of Planeswalker to make into a Planeswalker deck for War of the Spark, because traditionally it's one of the mythic Planeswalkers that are in the set, but this particular set has so many Planeswalkers in it that you could theoretically just choose any Planeswalker. Now, I kind of wished it was Dak Faden instead of Jace, Arcane Strategist, because War of the Spark story doesn't even have a Dak Planeswalker in it, and he dies in it, so we never get a chance to see another Planeswalker from him. Instead, we get Jace, who has a rare Planeswalker in the set. This would be, I think, his second Planeswalker deck after the Ixalan deck. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside. Here's our foil Planeswalker card. It says Jace, Arcane Strategist, and he is a 4 and 2 blue for 4 loyalty Planeswalker. And he has static ability, which is something that was introduced in War of the Spark, and it says, whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. In addition, you can get a loyalty counter to draw a card, powerful ability, and for -7, creatures you control can't be blocked this turn. And so this is, I guess, a way for your board to get in and win. The deck box here has some cool Jace artwork. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside. Here are our 2 War of the Spark Planeswalker packs. Just a little bit squished, but everything seems to be intact. Both Liliana. This is our strategy insert. The layout and the font appears to have changed, but it still reminds you to play the deck a bit before you open the included booster packs and upgrade it. Playing the deck says a master strategist like Jace knows how to get the most out of every resource at his disposal. Team up with Kiora to call great beasts from the depths of the ocean, then enhance them with +1/+1 counters to maximize their power. Dodge your opponent's defenses, disrupt their plans, and attack with larger and larger creatures until you take them down. So this appears to be a go tall plan, making your creatures bigger and bigger. You have Kiora in the deck as well, perhaps in her uncommon form. You get a little bit of information about some of the mechanics that you're going to be encountering in the deck, and then a little bit of information about Jace himself. Jace Beleren has been many things in life: a telepathic prodigy, an unwitting spy, a pirate, briefly, the living guild pact of Ravnica, the walking embodiment of ancient law in magic. In all those roles, his mind has always been his greatest asset, but now, as the War of the Spark heats up, both his power and his intellect will face their greatest test yet. There is some bit of information about Jace, but I kind of wish that there was a lot more story in one of these packages, because you are buying a Planeswalker, and I would like to know more about this character than just a super brief summary. And it doesn't even tell you that much about what's going on in War of the Spark with him. So this is a bit scant, but so is playing the deck, and this has always been a little bit less than desirable in terms of what you get. On the back, you get a guide to how to play a Planeswalker, and I think that this is very important because this is a very complex type of card, in addition to an ad to play Arena. Let's take a look at what's inside. Alright, one of our rares for this deck is the Spark Double. It is a 3 and a blue for 0/0 illusion creature. However, you may have a Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or Planeswalker you control, except that it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature. It enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a Planeswalker, and it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. This means that you can have a second Jace, just like in the picture. This is a pretty fun rare, especially in a set that has a Planeswalker and that you can duplicate and have both on the battlefield. You also get a Bioessence Hydra, which is 3 green and blue for a 4/4 Hydra mutant. It has Trample, and Bioessence Hydra enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each loyalty counter on planeswalkers you control. And then whenever one or more loyalty counters are put on planeswalkers you control, put that many +1/+1 counters on Bioessence Hydra. So this works really well with planeswalkers, and this is a set for that. And you have one, probably more than one planeswalker, and so this isn't bad. You also have Jace's Ruse, which is for 3 and 2 blue, a sorcery, and it says return up to 2 target creatures to their opponent's hand, and then you can grab Jace from your library or your graveyard, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. This is the card that he uses to find himself, and the effect is decent. It acts as a bit of tempo for this deck, and then you get Jace. So not the worst ability, but also not the best because it doesn't permanently do anything to the board. And as mentioned in the strategy insert, here is your Kiora Behemoth Beckner, and that appears to be the uncommon planeswalker included in this deck. I don't know if we'll see any more, even though there are a lot more. It appears Guildpact Informant is Jace's common. It is 2 and blue for a 1/1 Fairy Rogue. It has flying, and whenever Guildpact Informant deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, proliferate. So it's interesting because this plays very much with the proliferate theme, and it works when it hits a planeswalker as well. And so it appears that you are going to want to make your creatures bigger and bigger and bigger with +1/+1 counters, or make your planeswalkers gain +1 counters, and that works with the Bioessence Hydra. So this is pretty cool. You also get Jace's Projection as the uncommon for this deck. For 2 blue, you get a 2/2 Wizard Illusion, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Jace's Projection. So it works pretty well with the draw card element and the counter theme here. For 3 and a blue, you can put a loyalty counter on target Jace Planeswalker as well, which again synergizes well with some of these +1/+1 counter growing shenanigans that are in this deck. At the end, we have some information about the different popular Magic formats, but that's not terribly useful for a beginner. We have how to cast spells on your turn, the stuff that you'd find in previous references, as well as a link to learn Magic and about attacking and blocking. And then on the back here, you have your code that you can use to redeem this deck on MTG Arena. I've already done so, so don't waste your time trying to do so. But I appreciate very much that you can grab this deck, get a digital version, and get right to playing it on Arena. Although I'm sure you're going to get completely blown out if you try to actually play this deck in any mode, really. And that is everything inside the box. I'm going to play this deck a bit, and then I'll be back to let you know what I think about it. Okay, so I got to play with this deck a little, and this is perhaps the most focused Planeswalker deck that I have ever played with. Almost every card in this deck, there are only maybe 2 exceptions, one of which is hardly an exception, really work towards the idea of either adding or growing +1/+1 counters. So this is really apparent from Jace's common, which is the Guildpact Informant. There are 4 of them in the deck, and what they do is when they hit your opponent, they cause a proliferate, which means that everything that has +1/+1 counters, as well as your Planeswalker's loyalty counters, gets another counter. And so many cards in this deck work towards either giving you those +1/+1 counters or proliferating those +1/+1 counters. For example, the rare, the body double, starts with an additional +1/+1 counter. So whatever creature that you choose starts with an additional +1/+1 counter, and you need that first counter in order for your creature to grow when you proliferate. Jace's Projection, Jace's signature uncommon, gives you a +1/+1 counter on it every time you draw a card. And you draw a card at least once a turn. That plays with Jace's personal theme, which is card draw, which Jace Arcane Strategist offers you. You can draw a card, and then whenever you draw your second card each turn, you get a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control, which means that if you take him up on your turn, he will already add a +1/+1 counter to another creature you control. So the idea is that you spread out the counters so that a lot of your creatures have +1/+1 counters, and then you proliferate, and all your creatures are going to be getting huge. Your Bloomhulks enter the battlefield, and when they do, they proliferate. Your Cura's Dambreakers, when they enter the battlefield, they proliferate. The Bioessence Hydra gets +1/+1 counters based on the loyalty counters on your planeswalkers. So it grows when your planeswalkers grow, and it starts out huge if you already have a planeswalker on the battlefield. And so that works with your +1/+1 counter theme. I think the only cards here that don't necessarily work with +1/+1 counter theme are Jace's Ruse, but that's fine because it does offer you some tempo in returning your opponent's creatures to their hands, and Primordial Worm, which is just a big beater, and probably the first card that you're going to be looking at replacing when you are upgrading this deck. That's not to say that the deck doesn't have any problems. So one of the problems with this deck is that its mana curve is really, really weird. It has this incredible number of 3 mana cards right here. And these are all enablers of some sort that work towards your deck's plan, or in Jace's Triumph it draws you cards. And it's just fun to have because if you have Jace it draws you an extra card, right? But otherwise, all of these are enablers to turn on your abilities. For example, Stealth Mission gives a creature 2 +1/+1 counters and then makes it unblockable, which is great to put in your Guild Pact informant if your opponent has another flying creature, because then you can attack through the flying creature, make your Guild Pact informant grow bigger, and then make everything else grow bigger. Courage in Crisis lets you put your first +1/+1 counters on creatures, and then it proliferates. New Horizons gives you ramp so that you can cast your bigger spells. Fixing, which you don't really need that much of in this deck, but it does let you change the color of mana that you're creating, and adds a +1/+1 counter to your creatures. So say that you played a Bloom Hulk and you want to put a counter on it, you can play your New Horizons, ramp you into playing your 6-drops, and then put a counter on your Bloom Hulk so that the next time you play a Bloom Hulk or Kira's Dam Breaker, everything proliferates. The band togethers are not going to work with the theme directly, but what it does let you do is it lets you remove creatures, because when you cast it, you can have your creatures deal damage to a target creatures as well. So even though your creatures may be huge, you can take out an even larger creature using your band together. So that is a pretty powerful spell as well. But you have only 5 cards that are 2-drops, 0 1-drops, and then you have this gigantic number of 3-drops. And that does make it hard sometimes for you to have impactful plays later in the game, because you're often going to be drawing one of these. And it also means that this deck is really slow to get started. You really want to have one of these 2-drops in your hand at the very start of playing with this deck, because otherwise there is a chance that you will get run over, because on turn 3 you're likely not going to be able to play anything here except for your Guild Pact informant. That's a 1/1. If you don't have one of these on the battlefield first, even when it hits and it proliferates, it's not going to do anything, right? And so this deck is really slow to get going, because you need to start putting Guild Pact formats down and then putting counters on them and then attacking with them if you don't have a Palmbite Druid with a counter or a Merfolk Skydiver, which can put a counter in when it enters the battlefield. And so it's a little swingy in the fact that you really want to make sure that you have one of these lower drops as well as maybe a Guild Pact informant in your hand. But outside of that, I think the deck works really well. This is one of the best Planeswalker decks ever, and that's just because so much of the deck is working towards a specific plan, and it gives you enough places where you're wondering how it works towards a plan, like the Primordial Worm, that it gives you something that you want to upgrade. But otherwise, the deck works really well. There are 25 lands here, but I think that works fine just because of how expensive this deck is and how mana intensive it is. You want to be able to play like 2-3 mana cards to like really pop up your creatures and then go in on the attack. And you know, you do have a good number of 6 mana spells here that you want to be casting. And so the fact that it's 25 lands is fine and makes sense. I'm glad that they cut it down from 26 lands. So aside from issues with the curve, I think that this is perhaps one of the most powerful Planeswalker decks ever printed. And it works really well if you want to just jump in and go wild with this +1/+1 counter proliferate theme. Let me know what your thoughts were about this deck in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more such videos, hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.